Thank you to the Ravenholt family for establishing this program that enables Grandview to bring speakers to campus who articulate the relevance of the philosophies of Danish philosopher and theologian NSF Grundtvig to modern life and society. Your written program provides a bit of background on Albert Ravenholt, but perhaps most noteworthy is that while he was a foreign correspondent, Albert also was a visiting scholar on numerous college and university campuses. Our speaker this morning certainly embodies the spirit of the Ravenholt gift and our mission to serve the public good. It is my honor this morning to introduce Major General Timothy Orr. General Orr is currently serving as the advisor for Intergovernmental Affairs, National Guard Bureau with the United States Pentagon. He is responsible for strategic planning, policy and legislative recommendations, and assistance to the Chief National Guard and Vice Chief National Guard Bureau on intergovernmental relations. Prior to that, General Orr served 40 years with the Iowa National Guard before retiring in May of 2019. During his last 10 years, he oversaw 9,000 guardsmen as the Adjutant General and Director of the Iowa Department of Public Defense. His primary mission was to ensure the Iowa National Guard trained, mobilized, deployed, sustained, and reconstituted units, ensuring the state of Iowa provided ready forces in support of our community, state, and nation. General Orr began his military career by enlisting in the Iowa Army National Guard in 1978, just a few years ago, after graduating from Boone High School. He received his officer's commission through the United States Army Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning in August 1985. He has commanded at the detachment, company, battalion, and brigade levels. General Orr has also served as Chief of Staff, Iowa Army National Guard, and as the Deputy Adjutant General. General Orr received an associate's degree from Des Moines Area Community College, a bachelor's degree from Drake University, a master's degree in education from Iowa State University, and a master's degree in strategic studies from the United States Army War College. And I learned this morning that General Orr's mother was a non-traditional student back in the 70s here at Grandview University when we were a two-year college. She then went on to Drake University, where her husband and General Orr's father had graduated. She supported him during his college years. She then went on to Drake, earned her teaching degree, and was a sixth grade teacher in the Boone School District for 20 years. So please help me in welcoming Major General Timothy Orr.
Dana, they must have paid you, thanks. So good morning, and I'd say welcome back. I understand, talking to Dr. Keck, that most of you had Friday off, you had the weekend, and now you're here, and it's like church, you're all in the back. So kind of makes me feel right at home. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be here today and to really talk about a subject that I'm very passionate about. But before I do, I would remind you that my wife told me a story as I was going out the door that she does quite frequently. And she says, just remember Julius Caesar. And so it caused me for a minute to think, and when I'm driving from my home in Johnston to come over here, it dawned on me. See, Julius Caesar, for those of you who study history, remember that he was a very famous general. He toured all of Europe. Many wars, was a great battles, and he won most of those. He gave a long speech, and they killed him. So the message here this morning is don't give a long speech, or who knows what will happen to you. I'm going to deliver a few remarks, and then I'm going to talk about the kind of nest into what I'd like to really tell you about is a program that I'm very passionate, and it's called the State Partnership Program. And for those of you that may be familiar at all with the State Partnership Program in Iowa, our partner is Kosovo. And for most people, when I talk about Kosovo, they have no idea where you even find it at. They've heard of it, they may have heard of a war sometime back in 1998, 99, but at the end of the day, they couldn't point on a map where Kosovo is. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to talk about the success of the State Partnership Program, how it's currently playing out in Ukraine, and then I'll do some Q&A, and love to hear your questions about what's going on where I can and when I can talk about it around the world. And from my position as a former general, and more important as a citizen that stays very abreast of what's going on throughout the country and throughout the world. And so I would like to start, first of all, about really the world situation and where we're currently at in our nation. And so as most of you know, I spent 40 years in uniform, and every year I thought things were sometimes really bad. And yet here we are today, having just came out of 20 years of war in both Iraq, Afghanistan, and other locations, and Syria with the ISIS, and we're still involved today. And yet who would have thought that when I first joined the military, our enemy at the time was the Soviet Union. And I never would have thought, having spent time in the 90s, who put together a bilateral relationship between Iowa and with Rostov in Russia, more important with Moscow and the emergency management focus. I never thought that I would see, after all my time in the 90s, being in Moscow and Russia and Stavropol, getting to know the people, that we sit here today with Russia, and not the Soviet Union, but Russia on the skirts of deeply engaged with Ukraine, and to watch NATO and all the other countries involved in this effort to ensure that the world order doesn't change for the future. And so I just would say that the thing that has really made it for our country and continues is what we call security cooperation. Security cooperation is a process where we align the United States Army, our military, it aligns our Air Force, and it aligns our National Guard with what we call a partner, a security partner. And it's driven not because of we pick a partner or a country, but it's really driven by these documents that we see every year that come out on a cycle. And so I need to talk about them. I hate to get detailed, but it's important that you realize, because our military and our nation does things around the world for a reason and a process to ensure that democracy can withstand and hold, not just in America, but for those that want democracy. And so this United States, we call security cooperation enterprise, is really, it's a changing and it's an adapting requirement, and every year it's a little bit different. And the focus comes from a couple different resources. And specifically, folks that I work around, or not necessarily work for, but I see once in a while, which is the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Milley, the President of the United States, and also the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin. Those three are very pivotal to the security cooperation for our nation. And there's three documents that come out of the Pentagon that also tie into the White House, and they tie into our military. And the first of that is what we call the National Security Strategy. And then you have the National Defense Strategy and the National Military Strategy. This first document that I'm going to talk about, the National Security Strategy, is required annually, and it comes out of the Department of Defense. And it's for the executive branch. It's for the President, Congress, and for America. And it really talks about how the administration, the United States, is going to use the instruments of power, diplomacy, information, military, and economic, to deal with the issues associated around the world. And if you watch closely, when something happens, you will see often that we use, especially in Ukraine, we've used a tremendous number of the instruments of power. And in most cases, it didn't start out with any military. It started out with diplomacy, with the hope that you can stop an issue and maybe change the course of where the issue's going before it escalates. The next one is using information to inform the citizens, information to inform the countries, the nation, to help influence and maybe change, again, values and ideas. and turn a bad situation around to maybe hopefully a good. The military option, which is really the last option. And then the other one is economics. And you'll see in Ukraine that there's been a lot of economic tools that have been applied, whether those are sanctions, whether that's NATO, whether that's the oil industry changing to go to more of a green focus versus a focus around oil industry, the reliance on Russia or the Middle East. We're seeing this all over, but those are the instruments that are used, and they're used in a variety of ways to hopefully eliminate the last resort, which is the military resort. The next document that I talk about is the defense strategy, and it's legislated and mandated by Congress, and it's required to come every 4 years. And it's really the DoD, the Department of Defense's capstone document. And from there flows the national security strategy, which informs the national military strategy, which is the foundation of how we use our military. The National Defense Strategy is really our objectives for military planning. If there's nothing else we do in the Pentagon on a given day, it's plan. And we're pretty good at planning. And most of that plan is against what we think are worst case scenarios. And so we try to ensure that our government, our leaders, and our nation are prepared for when bad things happen. And finally, the third document is the National Military Strategy. And it's developed by the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, and it's almost like a second person than the Secretary of Defense. And this secretary, or in this case, the chairman, does his own assessments, and he takes his own risk associated with things that he thinks are going to happen. So it's a check and balance between the national defense strategy and the military strategy, and the chairman has a vote in this process. At the end of the day, all three of these documents pull together, and they really form what we call our security cooperation strategy, which develops the partners, which is really what we're all about. And so if you would go out and then just recently, in fact, as early as last week, the national security document was signed, and it's out there, it's available. And I would encourage you to, if you're interested in that type of stuff, to go take a look at it. It will talk really a little more in detail of what I'm saying. But President Biden made some comments during his 76th address, or the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And the president said, as we look ahead, we will lead. We will lead on all the greatest challenges of our time, from COVID to climate, peace and security, human dignity and human rights. But we will not get it alone. We will lead together with our allies and partners in cooperation with those who believe, as we do, that this is within our power to meet these challenges, to build a future that lifts all other people and preserves the planet. In addition to the United Nations Assembly comments, the new national security strategy that was just released talks about using things like diplomacy, development cooperation, industrial strategy, economic statecraft, intelligence, defense, and partnerships in order to accomplish our goals. In order for that to work, this strategy is built off of several key pillars, and one of those specifically nests with my security cooperation partnership comments that I'll talk about with Kosovo. And that is that our alliances and our partnerships around the world are our most important assets, strategic assets, an indispensable element of contributing to national security, peace, and stability. A strong and unified NATO, our alliances in the Indo-Pacific, and our traditional security partnerships elsewhere do not deter aggression. They provide a platform for mutual beneficial cooperation that strengthens the international order. I think if you watch very closely in Ukraine, everything that has occurred from day one since the incursion of the Russians into Ukraine, the invasion, what we call a war, not just a military operation, you will see it's been about partnerships. And these partnerships are part of our, what we call fundamentals of our U.S. security strategy. And that concept aligns with NATO, with our NATO partners, but more important, the National Guard has a program. that's called the State Partnership Program. And it's probably the most inexpensive, most effective, viable partnership program that we have in the United States arsenal today. And this partnership program, or you're going to hear me refer to it as the SPP, it's really unique. It's low cost. It has a high impact to the Department of Defense and our nation. And what it does is it pairs our states, our territories, and the District of Columbia with a partner nation's military, its security forces, its government, and its citizens. And it's all based off of a piecemeal country, state select and determine their own avenue and approach that how they want to accomplish their objectives. This program is administered by the organization that I work for, the National Guard Bureau, and it's guided not on our own but through the State Department. So we take our lead as we work through the foreign policy goals, because in every country is an embassy, and every embassy has a country plan that aligns with the United States. And so we are doing our efforts and our energy towards these activities as part of the state foreign policy goals. It's executed at the state and territorial level by folks that I used to be like, which was an adjutant general. So in every state, the National Guard is headed up by a 2-star general officer, and the territories of the District of Columbia has a commander. And those 53 adjutants general and the commander of DC, they run their state partnership programs. And they work through the Department of Defense. They work with what we call the combatant commanders in the geographical regions, and they determine what they're going to do in line with their partner nations. And what was really interesting is if you go back and study the history of the State Partnership Program, it started in 1991 when the wall came down. So this was all about how do we take Soviet bloc nations and we work with them to help them transition to democracy. And so in 1993, we launched a program called the State Partnership Program as part of the United States Department of Defense, the United States European Command, which is a combatant commander, with an initiative to engage those post-Soviet bloc countries' defense ministries and their armed forces of those new nations of the Baltics, Central and Eastern Europe and Eurasia, using National Guard soldiers and airmen. And so this program started in 1993. It started with 3 Baltic countries. And it started with Estonia, who had a partner with Maryland, Latvia, that had a partner with Michigan, and Lithuania, that had a partnership with Pennsylvania. And before the end of the year, we added 8 more countries to this partnership program. Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, North Macedonia, Poland, Romania, Slovenia, and sure enough, Ukraine. So we have been partnering the National Guard for 30 years with Ukraine, whereas the partnership with Kosovo is right at about 11 years of age. These partners will this next year in spring of 23, we will celebrate the 30 years of this state partnership program. And the mission of the program is very important. Not only does it support the security cooperation and the objectives of the United States and the geographical combatant commanders of the United States, it partners with the countries to carry out what those countries want to do. So in the case of Kosovo, I didn't decide what I was going to do with the Iowa National Guard when I went into Kosovo and created a partnership. I had to work with the Kosovo military. And they told us what their shortcomings were, what their issues were, how we could help them. And so that is the focus, and we work very closely, just like all the other partners before us. The State Partnership Program is very strategic, and it's important to the national defense. And it helps the United States' ability to react and anticipate when unplanned things occur in these countries. Give you a prime example, and I'll actually move it up versus saving it to the end. So I mentioned a minute ago that California National Guard has had a 30-year history with Ukraine. And so when we build these partnerships, it is partners for life. Now, leaders come and go, but in my case, just like the Adjutant General that was in California, Dave Baldwin at the time, he grew up as a lieutenant with a partner working events in Ukraine. He becomes a captain and a major. He becomes a colonel, becomes the Adjutant General. Dave has spent 30 years working with the same people in Ukraine and their military for 30 years. For those of you who have ever served on active duty, you go to an assignment for 2 years, 3 years, and you move on. And so when you talk about the Department of Defense and you talk about knowing the Minister of Defense, or you talk about the Chief of Defense, or the Prime Minister or the President, in many cases in our partnerships, just like in mine, is we know them, we know their families, they've spent time on our homes, we've spent time in their homes. So when things start to go bad in the United States, in the Pentagon, you think we can get it all done. A lot of times it's all about relationships. And if you ever learn anything in life, you never want to burn a bridge, because those relationships, they become very powerful. So the night of the Ukraine, when the Russians decided to invade on the 2nd of February, and they lined up their vehicles and then bombed and started firing missiles and explosives into Ukraine and to Kiev and others, the first phone call that occurred in the United States in the middle of the night was the Chief of Defense from the Ukraine calling his friend, his state partner, Dave Baldwin, General Baldwin in California. And no one in the Department of Defense knew what was going on. And so what you begin to see here is very quickly is that we had to build a relationship between the Department of Defense and Dave Baldwin, because of the trust of their relationship and all the years of experience. They trusted Dave Baldwin and knew him much better than anyone in the Pentagon, to include the Secretary of Defense. Now, no offense to our leaders, but that's about relationships. So we very quickly had to stand up an ability to have the Secretary of Defense work with Dave Baldwin and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to get Dave Baldwin to set up meetings so that we knew what was going on in Ukraine. That is very powerful, and you will not see this in most relationships. And so you take that example and you combine that with what is now what was 3 partnerships back in 1993. We now have 87 partners that we've established in the 30 years. Of those 87, they're in actually 95 countries. So you say, well, how's that happen? A lot of our states and territories have more than one partner. We're in Iowa, we have one. It's called Kosovo. Several states, for example, Nebraska has both the Czech Republic, and they also, Colorado has Slovenia, and they have Jordan. And a good example of that relationship is back in the ISIS fight, when ISIS was first taken over, there was a pilot in the Jordanian Air Force that was shot down, and he was held captive, and the ISIS put him in a cage, and they burned him alive. And so the Jordanians decided to retaliate and to bomb several locations in Syria on the ISIS. And the lead aircraft in there was a California National Guard aircraft, along with their coalition partner, or their state partner, which was Jordan. The trust that the king had with Colorado and the Adjutant General, it's beyond reproach when you think about that relationship. This program we executed at what sounds like maybe a lot of dollars to you, but in the building I work in, it's petty cash, but $40 million. We do over 1,000 events in over 87 countries, 95 countries and 87 partnerships for that short little amount. The whole intent here is to build peaceful relationships. It's to build relations. And so as part of that, this whole program, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how a state partner is selected, because I often get asked questions about, well, did I just pick who I wanted? How does this work? And so this program really starts with the country. The country has to request a partner. So in the case of Iowa with Kosovo, the Kosovo Prime Minister, with consultation with his security officials, sent a note through the embassy to the Secretary of Defense requesting a partner with the Kosovo security forces. That goes through Department of Defense to the Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense pushes that down to the National Guard Bureau, to General Hokanson, my boss. He's a 4-star. He serves as 1 of 7 on the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. They then look at that partner. The National Guard sends out a notice to all the 54 adjutants generals in the country. And they said, if you're interested in competing to be a partner for this country, you need to submit a packet. And when I say submit a packet, it's focused about not just taking a country and a state and latching them up. We got to make sure they're going to be successful. So like California and Ukraine, why were they partners? Because California has a tremendous population of Ukrainians. Helps make the partnership go as you begin to develop. In the case of Iowa, when the Kosovo packet came down, I had been to Kosovo multiple times since 1999 at the end of the war, because Iowa National Guard soldiers have served along with many other soldiers and airmen have served in Kosovo during that war, from the air war to even after the war, as part of NATO force to ensure the security of Kosovo. So I had been there. I had seen the people. I had seen the country. And so we put the packet together. And at the time I became the adjutant general, the only thing we had going was that bilateral relationship that I ran as a major and a lieutenant colonel back in the 90s. And that was never going to go anywhere with Russia. So I saw the value of the partnership. I competed against 18 other states for Kosovo. I put that packet in. I focused it around why Kosovo. So those of you who've never been to Kosovo, don't know anything about Kosovo, it's the newest country in the world. It formed its independence in 2008 after the war in 98 and 99. It is the youngest, they call them the young Europeans. The predominance of the population is 26 years of age. They're all young. They're all energetic. They're all educated. They speak English for the most part. They're very diverse in ethnicity. They're very diverse in religion. They're very diverse in culture and the arts. If you ever go over there, you will see that the country predominantly before the days of Yugoslavia, which they were a part of at one time during Tito's days, and before Milosevic came in and basically caused the Bosnia-Herzegovina and the Serbian wars, they were a leading country in agriculture. So bingo, fit very well for us. More important than that is it's the most U.S.-friendly country that I've ever been to in the United States, in the world. And I say that, I've been to a lot of places in 40 years, and a lot of places we were not wanted as U.S. citizens. But here's a place where they have Bill Clinton statue on Main Street. They have Bob Dole Avenue. They have a statue of Bill Clinton. They have a bust of Madeleine Albright. And they fly more American flags on the 4th of July, our 4th of July, and on our Flag Day than most of Americans do. And why is that? Because they never forgot what happened in 1988 and 99 when the U.S. intervened. And we went in, and President Clinton decided that the atrocities had been enough is enough. We saw it in Bosnia with a place called Srebrenica, where 5,000 men and young boys were gunned down and massacred. We began to see the same thing we saw in Kosovo. And we saw ethnic cleansing, and we saw mass numbers of large graves. And so President Clinton stepped in, and because of that, they have never forgotten. And so it was a no-brainer for me when I left there to say, hey, this is the right place. I think it'll do very well in Iowa. So I put a packet in. I competed with 18 states. And fortunate for me, we were selected. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened to the state of Iowa and to Kosovo. So you can take several approaches to these partnerships. You can take strictly a military to military, where the United States National Guard, military, airmen work with the foreign military. You can do what we call military to civilian, where you're working with, let's say, military and emergency management. Or you could take a civilian to civilian, where you have education institutions working with education institutions. So from the very beginning of Kosovo and the partnership, from day one, I took an approach that is the hardest approach, but I felt it was the right approach. See, my background is education, and my degrees, for the most part, are all in education, and I taught for 8 years. Though I spent 40 years in the military, I realized that no matter what we do and how good we are, we can only do so much. It takes a whole of government and society approach to truly have a partnership that's worthy of our state. And so that's the approach I took. Took the hardest one. I guess that's why I went to Ranger School years ago, because easy was not in the vocabulary. Bottom line is that I went over, once we were selected, the notification occurs. I went over and I met with the Prime Minister, the President, and I met with the Minister of Defense. And I signed an agreement that basically said, okay, the Iowa National Guard initially is going to be working with the Kosovo security forces. I took the vision, communicated where I wanted to go with this to the President, Prime Minister. I came back to Governor Branstad, and I asked for him to help support making Iowa the 9th sister state for Iowa. See, Iowa has a program called the Iowa Sister City, Sister State Program. We've had 8 relationships through the years. Places like Stavropol, Russia, Mexico, China, and you've probably heard about the different trips and the different events over the years. This was all started because of Governor Ray and his desire to help out refugees coming out of Vietnam and later into Bosnia. And so this program, I knew in order for it to make it to the next level, I needed to take it to what we call the Sister State Program. So I went to the governor and said, allow us to Iowa to make it the 9th sister state. I will make it the best program in the country. He agreed to do that, and that really got the ball rolling. And I partnered with the sister states, so every time we did a military event, we had a civilian event. And on top of that, a state partnership program. Every program, you're allowed to put somebody in the country for 2 years at a time. A National Guardsman and women put into the country. And so I had connectivity with Kosovo to help me make things work. I could connect the good ideas and make them happen. And so we started. As this started to mature, we started gaining sister cities. We now sit today with 7 sister cities. So Des Moines is aligned with Pristina, which is the biggest city. We've got the city of Johnston, which was the first. My city with Peja in the western part of Kosovo. We have Fort Dodge, we have Sioux City, we've got Cedar Falls, Ames, and we have more, I think 3 more ready to go. Every year I take a group over to summertime to work our civilian-to-civilian relationship. Now that 10 years have gone by, we are on really 2 separate tracks. The Iowa Guard runs the military, what we call cooperative partnership. They do events together focused around cyber, around leadership, around soldier and NCO and officer development, non-commissioned officer development. On the civilian side, we do a lot different. And so last year was a pivotal year. We have a multitude of education institutions of higher learning in Iowa that have partnered with Kosovo. And so last year, Iowa, University of Iowa, Iowa State, Drake University, DMAC has a huge program with Kosovo, and soon hopefully we'll get Grandview over in the next future. But the important thing here is that it isn't about just Kosovo to Iowa. This is about a relationship, which means that professors going over and working in Kosovo. Iowa State professor Kurt Youngs, who is an agriculture professor, has spent 8 years over there, extremely noted for his work in the agriculture industry and the dairy industry. He spent 8 years and continues to work to help bring their dairy herds up to a higher level. He has students that come over. We have a program in Kosovo for the summer. It's a 5-week program that's a peace and conflict, where students go from Iowa over to Kosovo and they get to spend 5 weeks touring the Baltics. They go to Serbia. They get to learn about all the issues that have occurred, both in peace and instability. And they go to Serbia, they go to Bosnia, Herzegovina, they go to Croatia, they go to North Macedonia, they go to Montenegro, and they go to Albania. And ultimately they come back to Kosovo as part of that 5-week study. These kind of things have been going on. The Des Moines Area Community College 2 years ago signed on with the Millennium Challenge for, basically it was a $5 million program to send 28 young women from Kosovo to DMAC for 2 years to what we call Women in Energy program. The Millennium Challenge is a worldwide program paid for these students to come here to get an education with a guarantee that these women would go back into the workforce and get jobs. I was there this summer, happened to run into 3 of them, and all of them are either working for an energy firm or they're working in a energy area, a electrical engineering or some other type of engineering firm. Have done very well. And so these programs continue, and that's just in education. I can tell you that we've done the same thing with our cities. We've done the same thing with our arts. This year at the Arts Festival in Des Moines, some of the best artists in the Balkans region comes from Kosovo. The musicians, Rita Lupa is a Kosovar. And I will just tell you is a lot of that exchange and a lot of that cultural, it's important that we allow it to come here, and the same vice versa when we go there. And so this program continues to grow. It continues to be a gem in the perspective of not just for Kosovo, but for Iowa. And I hope that for many of you, we have now what we call a Kosovo committee that's run out of the Iowa Sister States office. It's a committee that's focused about how do we take our desires, our goals and objectives, and how do we work with Kosovo to accomplish what we want to do in Iowa, at the same time working with the Kosovar government and the people of Kosovo. I say that because the other thing has not been done in the 95 country partners that we currently have is that we were able to go out in 2014. We worked with the Prime Minister and the President of Kosovo to get a consulate put here in the in Iowa. Now you say, what's a consulate? A consulate is a place where citizens from Kosovo Albanians, when something happens to their visa, something happens to their passport, they get into trouble, just like what happens to the U.S. when we go overseas to our embassies. The consulate takes care of that. As of right now, there's only one consulate before 2014 for Kosovo, and that was in New York City. The second one is now in Iowa. And oh, by the way, this last year, we worked closely with the Prime Minister and with the President for Foreign Affairs to get a full-service consulate here. So now every service that's offered in New York is offered here in Iowa. Is that important? Absolutely. Not only is it important to the citizens, it's important to Iowa, because the model of why they came here and why they put a consulate here, I'm being asked about from a variety of countries all over the world. Because normally when you come to the United States, your significant input is always New York City, Washington, D.C., Chicago. People are beginning to ask, why Des Moines? Well, why not? Build it and they will come. The idea here is that a consulate in Des Moines causes people from around the United States to have to come here, 1. 2, they get to see an opportunity where we have more jobs than people. Oh, by the way, there's a tendency to want to do business here. More important is if you go to New York and Chicago, nobody cares when you knock on the door. It costs money. Here, people are knocking on the door because they see opportunity. And I'm talking about Iowans, companies, small companies, education institutions I talked about a minute ago that want to do something passionate, and the only way they're looking for is a new market. They're looking for a new opportunity. So they go to the consulate to help be that point of contact to reach into Kosovo and find a businessman or woman or a business that will connect to someone here in Iowa. And so we have young people today that are doing that through IT. They're doing that through entrepreneurship, and we're connecting startup organizations in Kosovo with startup organizations in Iowa. Why? Because we live in a state where that opportunity is easy to do, and it's not so easy in other parts of the country. And so this model, we think, will grow to the point where at some point we will have a lot of small countries that will come here because they see opportunity not just from the Baltic region, but from all over the world. And so, the history, the diversity, the interest here, it only makes sense for Iowa. And we have a history of that that goes back, as I talked about, with the refugees from Vietnam. And our governors in the past and current see value in this program. And so I think what you will see when the state partnership in the years to come is that you will see a mature relationship focused on individuals military being probably the low priority, and it will really be focused on those things that are going to make us better society.
Thanks very much, General. We really appreciate your service and your presence with us today. Thank you very much. You're here formally as the Ravenholt Visiting Scholar, and so I also want to acknowledge that and just comment on how I think he would be so pleased to have heard your remarks today, because he was very concerned with this, as you say, the global environment in which we all live. One of the things that has stood out to me as I think about the state partnership program with the Guard is it makes total sense, right, that the National Guard would go in and help a new nation develop its military and its security forces. But National Guard folks are also have civilian jobs. And so they're capable of helping a new nation develop its civic infrastructure, education systems, healthcare systems, and the like. And so I'm probably not the only person who didn't connect those dots before having a conversation with you this summer. So thanks again. Appreciate your time with us.